All right, I've hit record. Today is February 10th. It is the 28th of Shabbat, which means we are but a day away from Rosh Chodesh, which will be Friday. We are studying Masechet Shabbat, chapter 2, and we are, I believe, on, let's just pull up the screen so I'll be accurate. We are 32b, Lamed Beis, Amud Beis, a considerable way into that page. And we've still been talking about an interesting segment of the Talmud where we're drawing correlations between certain protections and perks that are provided by virtue of observing certain mitzvot, and conversely, certain hazards, liabilities, and trouble that a person might find that could be, not is, but could be associated with the failure to observe one of those mitzvot. And the mitzvah that we've discussed, just really briefly, mezuzah, false oaths, or making an oath and not fulfilling it, Torah study or bittul Torah, and what else? Mezuzah, tzitzis, mezuzah, tzitzis, oaths, and bittul Torah. I believe those were the four that we've discussed so far. We also talked about the benefit, the value, the perks of wearing a talis. The Gemara talks about many people running after you, trying to serve you, wanting to help you, wanting to have something to do with a person that has the great privilege and the aura of having worn a talis. We studied the Tosfot yesterday, which gave us a little more insight into possibly into the development of the talit in general. And we added the talit katan, the four-cornered garment that maybe some know as an arba kanfos, a small talis, or today it's referred to as tzitzis, even though tzitzis refers to any garment that has the fringes, but we've come to use the word tzitzis to talk about the personal talis, and then the talis is the way we describe the prayer shawl, like the rectangular four-cornered garment that we wear typically during prayer. So Tosfos brought to our attention that it appears that once upon a time, all clothing was like a talis, and all clothing essentially warranted tzitzis, and therefore a person doesn't have tzitzis, they're most likely not observing the mitzvah of putting fringes on their garments. In the time of Tosfos, in the very modern times, or perhaps a little later in our day and age, where most garments do not have four corners, well then you should still try to wear a talis, but not necessarily with all of the extreme harsh statements of the Gemara apply. Of course, this led us to an interesting observation about the few vestiges of garments today that do have four corners, like the possibility of a tuxedo or a Prince Albert, a kapata, as described, the Chabad silk Shabbos and holiday garment, or other, Hasidic groups that would have a slit in the back. And so many, not many, the custom actually is, the practice is to have a rounded corner to take care of that concern. Additionally, there are halachot, and we're not going to go into them now, about other kinds of garments, like a towel that's not just a towel, but it's a bathrobe of sorts that you do wrap around. You might need to be mindful of it, or other situations. The laws of tzitzis are a little bit complex. I'm not going to go into the specifics, but suffice it to say, you have items that are called ksut yom, ksut laila. You have clothing that is a daytime clothing and nighttime clothing. And are you really wearing it? It's all discussed in the Code of Jewish Law. So I just want to put it out there as it's something that's out there. We are not done yet. We're not quite yet done with the subject of certain mitzvot and their perks, and the absence of mitzvot and the hazards or punishment that could ensue. I'm not going to repeat all of my disclaimers or my perspective on how to view it with that, but I just want to remind you that the way I see it, and we had ample opportunity to see it somewhat in the text, is that although we are describing it as a punishment for a sin, but we could also view it as the loss of certain protections or the loss of certain perks, which would cause a person to be more vulnerable to the fragility of life and the fragility of living, particularly in the conversation of our Gemara, in that time that the Gemara, the Talmud, and the Mishnah were discussing, which again, human life was even more fraught with danger, even more fragile. But of course, recent events remind us that we should never take anything about our lives and our good blessings we have for granted. And of course, we begin today with a prayer for the health and healing of all. And we've dedicated the remainder of this week for the yard site, which was yesterday and included last night, for Tzvi, Rabbi Yochanan Halevi Zal, as well as this month Chayalei Abbas Binyamin Ala Shalom, and again in prayers for healing and health for everybody. Now we'll jump inside to our share.
Rabbi, I just want to tell you,
yes,
you do such a wonderful job for the introduction. Breath, you should be on C-SPAN.
Thank you, Reb Nachum. I don't know enough about C-SPAN to know if that's a compliment or not, but I'll take it as a compliment. Thank you. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol niyeh b'dvaro.
Amen.
Amen.
Siman. We have a mnemonic. Now, you may recall last time we had this word siman and we debated what a mnemonic is and if it was the right word, because we thought maybe mnemonic only was Rashi Tevis, meaning it was an acronym, but it seems like a mnemonic doesn't need to be an acronym. It can also be some other kind of technique to recall a series of items akin to an acronym. So siman. The sages put together a mnemonic, a clue, to remember the next several items that are to be discussed. Sino, hatred. Challah, the challah bread that we know. Truma, the food that's gifted to the Kohen. Nigzeles, stolen. Dina, judgment. Again, this is all Chinese until we're going to see the Gemara, but I'm just translating what this mnemonic, the next several items that we're going to discuss. Shavua, an oath. Shipuchta, sounds like, right? Lishpoch, shvicha, pouring. Giluya, uncovering. Vinivluta, not nevela, but vulgarity, says Rabbi Steinsaltz. So let's just go through a fast recap here in Rabbi Steinsaltz's translation. Hate, chala, shruma, stolen, judgment, oath, pouring, uncovering, and vulgarity. All right, let's begin. Tanya, we have a Braita that says as follows. Rabbi Nechemia Omer. Rabbi Nechemia said or taught, Ba'avon sinat chinam, in a punishment for hatred, baseless hatred. Meriva rabba b'toich beisai shel adam. There could be great meriva, discord, fighting in one's home. So I believe what we're saying is baseless hatred for another person, not in your household. Rashi, Shalom. Let's see. We all know the word sinas chinam, baseless hatred. And don't discard what you know sinas chinam to mean. But let's take a look at what Rashi translates sinas chinam, baseless hatred. And we may find, just like previously, Rashi totally changed our understanding of a very well-known story. Let's see what Rashi calls sinas chinam. Dvar avera, that the individual that you're hating has not done something terribly egregious, a terrible sin, a crime against humanity, because there are certain people who are so terrible and mean and horrific that one is permitted to hate them. Those who study the Tanya are maybe familiar with this conversation, because the Bala Tanya asks a question which I'm just going to go mention briefly. I hope I get it right. The Bala Tanya discusses that there's an obligation to love every Jew. And yet, the Baal Tanya says, we know from the Talmud that you also have to hate certain really terrible, no goodniks, no bad doers, bad actors, sinners, mean, evil people. You should hate them. So the Baal Tanya asks, which one is it? Do you have to love every Jew? Or are there certain people that warrant, by virtue of their despicable, reprehensible behavior, do they warrant our hatred? And the Baal Tanya says, a good Jewish answer, both. As a brother, as a fellow human being, you have to love them. And you should feel sympathetic for the fact that they could become so messed up or stray so far from what's healthy and good and acceptable. But their practice, what they're doing, and the evil within them, you should have hatred for them. And why should you have hatred? Because it's important not to become desensitized to evil. Right? So we try to be understanding, but we also want to make sure that we maintain our disgust for acts of evil and being mean or harming others, or things that are terribly wrong. So we have to have this balance of loving and compassion for the individual while also feeling disgust at the terrible, mean, not good things that.
Rabbi, can I mention something?
Please do.
I think the Alter Rebbe also stresses that you're loving that every Jew means every Jew within every Jew. The Pintel Yid, Yisrael of every Jew. And the hating, I think, if I'm right or wrong, you but is the Yetzer Hara. You hate the person's Yetzer Hara. You hate
so the Baal Tanya, I think what Nachum is saying, and you're correct. And the Baal Tanya says, what is a formula to love every Jew? How can you love a stranger, a person that gets on your nerves? So the Baal Tanya says we have to try to, in our minds, become used to understanding and thinking about that every person that you deal with has a neshama, has a soul that's pure and holy and wonderful and connected to you. And so the more we become used to understanding and appreciating that a person is complex and a composite of a body and a soul, and the more we focus on our own soul and come to view others as owners of a soul, we're able to find love for them at that commonality. Again, easier said than done. But I want to tell you something interesting. That's the nutshell of the teaching. Which chapter of Tanya has this teaching? It's chapter Lamed Beis 32. And it's interesting that we are currently right now on page 32 of Masechet Shabbat. I don't know the correlation, but I'm just putting it out there. Doctor, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I mean, there are certain psychological theories and others that clearly differentiate between unconditional positive regard that you should have for the other, and differentiates between that and the behavior. So people who kill, okay, we are not in favor of killing. We're not in favor of blah, 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 blah. But there is something, they don't call it the soul or whatever, but the idea is that you should understand that this is another human being. Forget about why, what does that mean? And that the best that you could do for yourself also and for others is to focus on the behavior, which includes thinking, by the way. It's not just external behavior, but I'm just saying a lot of interwoven truths between the religious approach and some psychological theories for people who are looking to better their feelings about themselves and others.
Back to what we're talking about here, I think, is for Jews only. We're not talking about the.
Well, I would say, however, that I think that it's very interesting that psychology has a companion idea, which definitely sounds similar, if not the same idea in different words,
right.
and that's that. It's very interesting and good to hear. And we have to be able to kind of compartmentalize how we look at the person's behavior and who the person is. And maybe it's not identical or precise because one is using spiritual soul kind of language and the other is using the words of psychology, but there's certainly a lot of compatibility, and it's that's very interesting. I'm glad that you share that. And now, God willing, should I have the privilege to teach this chapter of Tanya in the future, I will have this idea to because people ask, how is it possible? Maybe the Baal Tanya is talking to tzaddikim or people living in a shtetl. But when we know that psychology uses a similar technique and encourages a person to have this ability to differentiate between the person and their actions, it makes the Tanya also more relatable, because it means that it's something that Jews have been doing for a while, but psychology believes that it's possible for a person to engage in such an exercise. And so the Tanya, being a Jewish text written to Jews, certainly is emphasizing on a Jewish person's relationship, but I'm not certain that the Tanya would not also encourage expanding that idea to understand and appreciate humanity more broadly. Reb Nachum. So you are correct that the Baal Tanya is talking to Jews, but it's a Jewish text to Jews at a time where if Jews would have a text talking to Gentiles, that would be another reason to burn or censor the book. So, I'm not saying that there aren't differences or distinctions in Jewish thought, but I'm just want to provide the broadest understanding of that text. So there we have it. But bottom line, back to so sinas chinam, we typically think, sinas chinam means the guy never messed with you, so why should you hate him? You're just hating because you're full of hate, right? I think that's how we usually understand baseless hatred. or the person's getting on your nerves, but they haven't really done anything wrong. That's baseless hatred. So I'm not telling you to discard that understanding, but Rashi is talking about a different kind of hatred. How would you ever have the right? So it's just because someone gets on your nerves, you're allowed to hate them? No. But Rashi says, there is such a situation where a person does something so terrible that you actually are tasked with hating them. But baseless hatred, hating without a license, that could generate, God forbid, friction and hate, discord within one's own home. Meriba Rabba, big, great discord. And Rashi says, Mida keneged Mida. If you're going to have a fight, God forbid, with another individual, well, then God forbid, a person could experience a similar friction in their home. And I guess, unfortunately, it's possible to say that certain people love picking fights. And so it's possible that they'll pick fights with their friends, they'll pick fights with their spouse, they'll pick fights with their, but I don't think that's what we're saying. We're saying is that a person should try to promulgate peace with everybody, and it also has a positive effect on one's home, because when you're in the mode of being peaceful, hopefully that would extend to one's home. And conversely, when not, it could, God forbid, be detrimental to the shalom bayis within one's home. And there's more sad things that our Braita is going to add. The ishtoi mapelas nafolim, God forbid, this person's wife could have miscarriages. Now it's being brought as a separate item, but certainly an unharmonious environment could be not good for healthy pregnancy as well. And God forbid, a person's children may not have longevity. So that is the opinion of Rabbi Nechem. Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Yehuda, says, if a person fails to contribute challah to the kohen, this is the portion of the dough before they make challah to our kohen gadol, ein bracha b'mechunas. So one sees failure or lack of blessing in their harvesting, the stuff they gather in. What does that mean? I don't know. I guess, crops could maybe not sell or could go bad. Or actually, Rashi makes our job easy. What is b'mechunas? Yayin v'shemen. We're talking about the wine and the oil. And a curse would mean that either the markets don't allow for them to be sold at a profit, or they become spoiled. So God forbid, a person doesn't donate the share to the kohen, their own shares, their own profits, their own bottom line could be hurt. Which conversely says that when a Jew gives charity, or in temple times, a Jew gives to the kohen, to the Levi, to the other people that are warranted with generosity, Hashem in turn, according to Jewish thought, extends blessing to a parnasa, and the person's affairs can prosper. So again, the positive and the negative. And there could be a curse in the markets. Again, when the markets drop, your produce could be in fine condition, but you can't fetch a fair price, and you could end up spending more money producing it than the profitability of the item itself. And God forbid, a person could plant seeds and others will end up benefiting from it. This is, by the way, referenced in the Teichah, in the admonishments given by Moses or by God and then in Moshe. As it says in the Teichah, this I will do for you, to you. If kadati aleichem, you will be visited. I will visit upon you. I'll point to you. Bahala, fear, terror. Es hashachefes. This is a kind of illness. Rabbi Steinsaltz says it is fever. Or no, even consumption. Anyone know what that is in English?
Tuberculosis.
Tuberculosis, not good, a disease. Thank you, doctor. If you see a paste, have doctors on the Gemara here. So a person, God forbid, could have TB and fever. Failing eyesight, medivas nafesh, and a soul that languishes. Uziratem, and this is the punchline here that he wants to say. Uziratem l'rik sarachem, a person will plant their seeds for naught, but your enemies will end up eating those plants. Al tikri behala, don't read the word behala, which means fear, ela bechala. That there's a correlation between chala and, God forbid, planting your field but not enjoying it. Here. If a person does give chala and a person does their dues, misbarchin, they'll find that there are blessings in their agriculture. Shenemer, give the first of your dough to the priest. so that one will bring blessing into one's home. So although the way it's phrased, of course, is all in the negative, but this text makes sure to point out that if you do one's dues, it is a positive blessing. And there are many, many wonderful people who share with me constantly. I guess maybe because I have the privilege, one of my jobs is to talk to people about considering giving tzedakah and supporting Jewish causes, with a special emphasis on Hallandale Hollywood Beach. So there are many, many people who share with me that they love giving tzedakah because they see, not everyone by the way, but some people tell me they always see a correlation between their charitable giving and God's blessings. And some people have more of a schus or a privilege for whatever reason, I can't tell you why, where they constantly have stories where they see that every amount of investment in tzedakah, they see either returns financially or other matters that they were hoping for. And so, again, everyone should have this schus to see. If a person chooses to be so gracious and kind to give charity to a good cause, they should be zeicha to see the benefit. But here we have it in the text as well. Just to be perfectly honest, there are others that have told me that they give tzedakah and they hear from their friends that when they give, things happen, and they've never experienced that, but they still like to give because it makes them feel good and they know it's right. But that is the full picture. This Ben Yoyada, which I'm not going to read, starts finding parallels, gematria parallels, between some of the sins and the tragedies that follow. So, for example, he says the way to spell challah in a certain gematria formula has the same gematria as other insignificant Kabbalistic ideas, which again, I'm just going to zip through over here. Well, we'll leave it at that. Suffice it to say, give challah, get challah. Give dough, you get dough. That's I think what our Gemara is saying. Okay. But Avain Bittul Torah, for the sin of, but Avain Bittul Trumas, Umaisros, a person fails to take care of their friendly Kohanes and Levis. Shemaim Netzarim Elahayrit Halamater, the heaven could vithhold rain and dew. V'hayoiker hoiva. And here Rabbi Steinsaltz says yoiker, which means usually valuable. He says expenses prevail. The hasachar aved, things become expensive, but the profit could be lost. God forbid. The ein magian, and people are constantly chasing for parnasa, for livelihood, but they do not achieve parnasa. God forbid. Rashi Hashmaim Netzarim Mataching Sham Mayikar Haiva. When there's no rain, there's less produce. When there's less produce, the scarcity causes the prices to rise. But income diminishes because the people don't have the sufficient yield of their field, I guess, to barter and trade and provide for their own families. Shenemar, there is a verse in Eov, Job, that says, Tzia Gam Chaim, thirst or drought and heat, Yigzilu Mimei Sheleg Sha'ol Chato, consume the snow waters, so does the netherworld, those who have sinned. My mashma, the Gemara says, what does this mean to say? Tana Bei Rabbi Shmuel. This is the explanation given by the yeshiva of Rabbi Shmuel. There are certain things that a person is commanded to do in the summer after they do the harvest. And if, God forbid, a person fails to do their dues in the summer, which is the Kayin and the Levi dues, God will hold back the rain in the winter, which is again a vicious cycle because a person needs the rain for their fields to prosper so that they could then harvest in the fall and summer and give to the Kohen and the Levi and the other people that they are due. But if a person does choose to take care of your very favorite Kohen and Levi, Misbarchim, their blessings proliferate. Shenemar, blessings become abundant. Shenemar Hiviu es kalmasar al beis ha'oisar, I have brought all the tithes into the storehouse. V'hiteref v'beisi, there will be food in my house. Uvechanunina bezois, Amar Hashem Tzavos, and test me, please, with this. Im lo eftach lochem et arubat hashamayim, if I will not open the heavens, meaning rain. Varikoisi lochem bracha ad bli dai, and I will pour upon you blessings ad bli dai. Let's see the way Rabbi Steinsaltz, more than sufficiency. Ad bli dai. So first of all, this is a verse in Malachi, which is famous for a number of reasons. It's famous, first of all, because our sages teach us the only time Hashem, through the prophet, tells the Jewish people, try it. Try getting it right. Try giving charity. Try taking care of the Kohen and the Levi. Do it right and see what happens. I will bless you in abundance. The Gemara asks, and then we'll ask Rav Nachum what this brings to mind. My ad bli dai. What is the meaning of ad bli dai, more than necessary, more than needed? Amar Rami bar Chama Amar Rav ad sheyivlu sifseichem miloymar dai. Until your lips will be worn out from saying enough. And this is the famous song, Rav Nachum, you know, V'hari kaisi lachem bracha. So there are a number of Hasidic melodies.
Yeah, don't taunt me here.
Nachum, I thought you were going to sing. I took a bite over here. Okay. So this
You want
is.
me to sing it? V'hari kaisi lachem bracha ad bli dai, ad bli dai, ad bli dai, ad bli dai, 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 ad sheyivlu sifseichem miloymar dai, 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 ad sheyivlu sifseichem miloymar dai, dai, dai. It usually goes on for about 10 minutes. And
So this is an
dancing.
upbeat Hasidic song on the very words of this verse, that Hashem should pour blessings to the point where we say, wow, what blessings. This is enough. Thank you, Hashem. And this is that Gemara, a powerful Gemara, and again, words that are memorialized in actually more than one Hasidic song. But the song that Reb Nachum sang is a song that I believe was sung on many occasions at the Farbrengens of the Rebbe, and the Rebbe would encourage it. And I think the Rebbe even, there are recordings of the Rebbe himself singing or starting this song, a song talking about blessings. And of course, that's what Jews do. We wish each other that Hashem should shower everyone with an abundance of blessings, to the point where we don't know what to do with it. And actually, I had a wonderful experience last night. Last night, at around
Wait a minute, you could tell them what to do with it.
At around 10 o'clock last night, I had a meeting with a rabbi, an Eruv inspector. And we were inspecting a neighboring Eruv to see if it is kosher enough to be annexed to our Eruv. And there's some work that needs to be done before that happens. But he told, as we're sitting, he gets a few phone calls of different Eruv projects that are looking to hire him. And he says, Rabbi, Label, I don't know what's going on. Hashem is just sending me all of a sudden so much blessing. It's so wonderful. So every Jew, every person should have that expression where all of a sudden Hashem sends so much blessing, they don't know what to do with it. And that's what our Gemara is saying. So anyways, so there we have it. We could stop. We could stop now after having such a powerful piece of the Talmud and after having such an important source, the original source. Dayenu, die. But we'll continue. Okay. By the way, so a lot of these expressions may sound familiar to you, because on Hoshana Rabbah, we make many prayers and a series of petitions for the Parnasa and for water and for abundance and for agriculture and for all the other blessings for the coming year. And so many of these words you might find familiar either from then or in general from the Hoshanot. So for example, we say Shaina, and one of the things we talk about is Govai, locusts. Because if you depend on agriculture for the totality of your income, one of the most terrifying things that could ever happen to you is Govai, locusts. Locusts, of course, can polish off an entire field after many months of hard back-breaking labor. Of course, we know Hashem had locusts pay a visit to Egypt in one of the plagues. And so we understand how distressful that must have been. So the Gemara continues and says, for stealing, for robbery, Hagovai Ola, that could trigger locusts to emerge and to ravage your fields. And if there are locusts, hara of hoiva, then famine becomes or prevails. God forbid, horrifically, the verse describes how a person could come so desperate to eat their own loved one's flesh. Shenemar shimu hadavar hazeh. In Amos, the prophet says, hear this matter. Pares habashan. Asher bahar shomerin ha'ishkos dalim ha'reitzim evyonim. Let's read the translation. You cows of Bashan. In case you were contemplating using you cow as an insult, well, apparently you have some biblical support. That are in the mountains of Samaria, that oppress the poor, that crush the needy, that say unto the Lords, bring that we may feast. And so we're talking about a mean abuse of people, terrible people of Bashan. Amarava kiganhani nishay de mechuza. I'm sorry, the verse continues. The Gemara, Rashi doesn't even bring it, but the next verse says, I have also given your cleanliness of teeth in all your cities. I want to bread all the places, referring to famine. And Rava says the cows of Bashan, it's describing like the people of Mechuzah, the Achlon, the Avdan, who work but don't produce. This is a little bit of a horrific statement, but I guess in a time of terrible poverty, if someone's going to choose not to be part of the working effort, they're going to compel. Rashi says, "V'nimsa shegoyzleis as baleim." Either if everyone is suffering, and someone in the household fails to do their fair share, they're in a sense robbing their spouse, or by constantly feasting when the husband or the breadwinner, whoever it is struggling, they're compelling the spouse to steal to support the lifestyle that's unsustainable. And not to judge, but I had a little bit of a tragic situation where there was an individual who would frequently reach out to me for tzedakah, and I would help them out. And then someone else brought to my attention Facebook posts of prolific, extensive, elaborate meals that were happening and being posted on Facebook. And no judgment. But I guess our Gemara is saying that it would be a tragedy for a person to be struggling for parnasa and then someone else taking the credit card and swiping and, creating and pushing beyond the means of that household. So our Gemara says, and then the verse continues and says, I've smitten you with blight and mildew, basically talking about damaging the harvest. The multitude of your gardens, your vineyards, your fig trees, and your olive trees has the palm worm devoured. And then it says, to which the palm worm has left, the locust has eaten. And that which the locust has left, the cankerworm has eaten. We'll see it inside, but let's just read. And that which the cankerworm left, the caterpillar has eaten. This looks like a good verse if you want to teach your kids all about different parts of the circle of life for insects. And it was written, one who snatches with the right hand and is hungry, he eats with the left hand, is not satisfied. They eat every man the flesh of his own arm. Do not read the flesh of his own arm, rather the flesh of his own offspring. A terrible story over here, a terrible Gemara, a terrible thing. But the point is, theft is no good. And God forbid, theft leads to even more and more toxicity and want, until the point, God forbid, of cannibalism is what the text here is saying. Doctor, go ahead.
Probably to put on the list, but I just don't want your side comment about the person you were helping out, and then you found out that perhaps it wasn't needed.
I still helped them. It was needed.
Yeah, no, but it was okay. But what I'm saying
they're misappropriating.
Okay, so that's the right concept. So the question is that people really have to learn, be careful with the best of intentions, to be able to try their best to evaluate a charity, and particularly some of the larger charities, and what percentage is going to administration and what percentage is actually going to, let's say, feed the needy versus into the pockets of wealthy people who are running it. And
absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. I do, however, need to add, because I said that.
Yeah.
Two things. First of all, the Rambam and the Gemara actually talk about that. A person that was once well off and they fall into hard times. So it actually says that part of tzedakah is to provide for their needs to the point, and this is a little hard to understand, to the point of allowing them to maintain their previous lifestyle. Even if they're essentially living a higher, more demanding, more costly lifestyle than other people. Because when a person falls from a certain comfort level, the devastation and the pain and the challenge to manage is much greater than a person that unfortunately never was privileged enough to live that kind of comfortable life. So I don't really mean to judge. That's number one. And number two, look, there's always, especially when you're dealing with difficult family dynamics, it's really wrong to judge. And one last thing, I was speaking to a colleague of mine whose family took a trip to Israel, a Chabad rabbi, and a supporter said, Rabbi, I'm no longer going to support you because I don't support you to take trips to Israel. If the man would have stayed to ask, the rabbi would have told him that someone else was doing a simcha, and they flew the rabbi over as part of the simcha, but the person chose to judge. So really, we have to be careful about judging. For all we know, this person, because they're needy, someone else was delivering them food, and so really, we have to be very, very careful about judging. I was just making the point about the Gemara is making, which is that we should try to not create pressure, which would compel somebody to, God forbid, in the case of the Gemara, feel compelled to do things that are unethical just to support what's going on. But if you remember anything from this class, I hope you remember my most recent comments as opposed to my judgment of that particular situation, which is that we don't really know. Of course, look, if people are giving charity and they're limited resources, certainly one is entitled and should do research. But when it comes to individuals that are needy, there needs to be a lot of discretion and discernment to help people out. But also, of course, you can try to talk to people about, maybe don't, like what I would have said is just don't post on Facebook. But anyways, let's. But again, my wish, my hope, my prayer is that everybody should be blessed with an abundance, and no one should have to be in a situation where they have to decide, what and how to provide for their families. But for the sin of delayed judgment. What do they say? Delayed judgment is, what's the phrase? What's the saying? Judgment delayed is
judgment denied.
Judgment denied, or something to that effect.
Justice denied.
Justice. So to hold off judgment. So Rabbi Steinzel says, judges delaying issuing their rulings because of personal considerations. They need to take a vacation, and so although they know the rendering, let's wait till we come back and then we'll give the psak. Meanwhile, the people in the Din Torah are left on shpilkas, they're left on pins and needles. They don't know what the resolution is going to be. Rashi. Once you know the verdict, don't torture the plaintiffs. Let them know what the psak is. So for the sin of Inoi Hadin, delaying judgment, the ivos hadin, or distorting judgment, the kilkul hadin. And Rabbi Steinzalt says the miscarriage of justice, ubitul Torah, and not learning Torah, cherev ubiza rabba, the sword, plunder, looting, videver, and pestilence, uvitsoiris, and famine, uvnei adam oichlin ve'enam sevein, people could come to the point where they're eating but are not satisfied, va'oichlim lachman b'mishkal, and they're eating bread by weight. What does that mean? By weight? Either that it's being rationed, or it's not cooking nicely, it's not rising or whatever, so it's heavy and it's being determined by weight instead of however typically bread is distributed. This is in the Torah. It says that I'll bring upon you a sword to avenge the covenant, the aim bris al Torah, and the word bris is a reference to Torah, meaning that for the bittul Torah, God forbid these things to happen. As we find the word bris, covenant, could mean Torah, where Hashem says, if not for the covenant, day and night, and it's describing the Torah. Basically, in the Toichacha, in the admonishments that are found in think Parshas Bahar. No, B'chukoisem, I'm sorry, B'chukoisem, where it has the Toichecha, so it talks about a shortage of food and the way it's going to be distributed and the struggle to provide. And it's a result of Yan Mishpatei Masu because they were disgusted by justice. Rashi explains, Rashi goes through the verses, but I think we did a fair enough job over here. Again, talking about different consequences of not properly doing judgment or Torah. For the sin of a false oath, a oath in vain. For example, okay, I'm going to read Rashi, but these are Rashi's words. An example of a oath in vain would be making an oath about something that's utterly obvious to all. Kigoin al ha'ishu isha, for example, to make an oath that a man is a woman. Shavuas sheker shem b'vidvadai nikeres mamash labriyos. Or in today's day and age, the sky is blue would probably be a better example. You don't need to make an oath that the sky is blue, well, unless it's gray. But usually the sky is blue, and so there's no need to make an oath about that. Or many other examples that actually Maimonides elaborates. So there's an oath in vain, which is not that you're saying something not true, but you're saying something that's not necessary to have an oath because everybody can get on board with that fact. Shavuas sheker is a false oath. So if you make an oath that the sky is green, unless, I don't know. You know what? Maybe someone has different concept of colors, or maybe certain areas. What do you call the North Lights? Are they a little green? But usually the sky is not green. Anyways, V'chilul Hashem, or desecrating God's name. V'chilul Shabbos, or the desecration of the Shabbos. Chayara, Rabba, this could cause bad animals, Ubehema Chala, and the livestock are decrease or die out, the Mismatim, and there are less humans around. I was listening to a podcast about Europe after the Black Plague, and because of archaeology as well as different tax documents, it was terrible how literally once a thriving countryside became almost entirely abandoned. And so here we're possibly describing a similar situation where there are a lot of wild animals, the cattle are diminished, there are less people around, and now the roads are empty and overgrown. If you will not take seriously for an oath. So we're seeing that with an oath, God forbid, terrible things for bad oaths could take place. In the same Leviticus, it talks about that God will sick Hashem will send away the cattle and bad animals will come into the field. And then it says, with a false oath, don't swear in my name falsely to desecrate God's name. So we see as a series of verses following the discussion of the desolation and the wild animals and the diminishment and the desolation of the land, we talk about the importance of oaths and not desecrating God's name. And Shabbos is also referenced in the verse that talks about chilul, desecration. So long story short, again, a series of terrible events. And we're not even talking so much as an individual. We're talking about here societal punishments. And as we know, tragically, the land of Israel, once the Jews were sent into exile, Israel never fully regained its glory until the Jews came back. And if you read all different accounts of Jews throughout the Middle Ages and earlier and in antiquity, although I guess right after the fall of the temple, the Romans tried to rebuild Jerusalem and they had other settlements, but eventually Israel becomes desolate. And when you read memoirs of individuals who visited and testimony of people visiting Israel in the 800s and the 900s and 1011 and 12 and 13 and until the modern age, you hear all about the desolation and how few people there were. And of course, during the Crusades, so you had waves of people, but this wasn't a sustained population growth. And certainly Nachmanides, the Ramban visits Israel, I think around 1200, and he describes how there was barely 1 million of Jews in Jerusalem. No, there wasn't 1 million of Jews in Jerusalem. And in general, the desolation. And of course, in the more modern time, we know the people that made the first Aliyah and they came up to Israel, you read about the Jews from Ashkenaz or the Sephardic Jews that preceded that. We know how desolate and impoverished and terrible the land of Israel was. And Baruch Hashem today, with great effort, investment, and miracles, Eretz Yisrael is a country that's thriving, and Hashem should continue to bless our land.
I think I remember seeing a documentary not too recently. It might have been Mark Twain took a trip to Jerusalem, and he reported it was the worst place he'd ever been. Yeah. Because it was like you say, it was I'm not going to say it, but it was disappointing. Back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, whatever.
I mean, Jerusalem, the old city, was popular, I believe. There's actually images of when Kaiser Wilhelm visited Jerusalem in the late 1800s, very early 1900s. And there are actually structures that were made in advance of his visit that remain to this day, especially near the very old part of Jerusalem. When you approach the old city, near David, Migdal David, so there, and it's like right where you have like the Christian Quarter. There's like hotels right when you come in. But suffice it to say, there was a lot of desolation. And so we're not talking about an individual's misfortune. We're talking more about a national calamity and the unfortunate disintegration of Israel. And that's what the Tochacha primarily is discussing. And so we have the horrors, the terrible effects of false oaths and both oaths in vain and the desecration of God's name and the desecration of Shabbos. And of course, I guess the other thing we always need to add when we're talking about the Tochacha, about the admonishments of the Torah, we can all say with certainty that all of the terrible horrors predicted or presented in the Tochacha have come true for the Jewish people over the course of the terrible exile. And the Tochacha ends with upbeat, optimistic promises, and certainly Hashem is able to cause those negative prophecies to come true and predictions. Well, Hashem has and can also provide the wonderful blessings, including some that we could probably say are already in the play. For example, the extent of how Eretz Yisrael flourishes. But of course, there's more to come, and it's more that's promised in the Tochacha. God could bring all the hardship. Hashem also is capable of delivering all the blessings, and may it be for us and all of Am Yisrael. All right, continuing a little bit further, and then we'll call it a day. We have a few minutes left. For murder, the temple can fall. And this would drive Hashem's presence from Israel. The verse says, and Rabbi Steinsaltz's translation is, you shall not pollute the land where you are. For blood pollutes the land, and no expiation, no kapara can be made for the land, for the blood that shed therein, but by the blood that of him that shed it. And you shall not defile the land which you inhabit, in the midst of which I dwell, for I, the Lord, dwell in the midst of the children of Israel. However, if you defile the land, you will not inhabit it, I will not dwell in it. Now let's just read it again. If you don't kill, you will not defile the land. But if you do defile the land, Hashem says, I will not be with you. And of course, those who study the history of the end of the Second Temple era know that there was a terrible amount of infighting and a terrible amount of murder of Jew to Jew. And of course, one of the reasons for the fall of the temple, both in the spiritual sense, is this bloodshed, but we can also point, I think, historically to the disintegration of Jewish freedom and Jewish independence, and a direct line between the infighting and the civil wars and the murder to that, starting with the tragic fight of two brothers, each trying to wrestle for control of Israel. These are the children of Yanai and Shlomet Alexander. I believe they were known as his children were Aristobulus and Alexander, I think. I have to go back and check. But anyways, their civil war and infighting led them each to bring allies, including the introduction of the Romans, and the Romans never left. And it ends with the fall of Jerusalem. So we see a direct line between the murder. And then also closer to the fall of Jerusalem, there's much discussion about the different sectarian groups and military leaders that were each vying for control. And as much as they were fighting the Romans, they were killing each other. And we read about the Sikari, or in the Talmudic language, the Sikrikon, which were professional assassins, and they had whole technique, and a lot of bloodshed. All right, let's read a little bit further. And for idol worship, it says, I will cast your carcass on the carcasses of your idols. So the Teicha says you're going to worship foreign gods. Well, then, God forbid, your end will be along with you. It uses a very tragic and poetic language. Your carcass will be in the carcass of your idols, meaning that the idols are dead and lifeless. And of course, trying to portray the irony of why someone would worship an idol. And then it says, I will make your temple desolate, and I will spread you among the nations. So, Avodah Zarah also, and when it comes to the necessity to observe the sabbatical and jubilee year and the consequence for not observing the sabbatical and the jubilee, it says, the land will remain desolate to reclaim its unrested years. So basically it's saying is that the Israel will be desolate because of the failure to observe the resting years of Shemitah and Jubilee. Let's see if this keeps. All right, we're going to do this last paragraph and then we'll try to give a fast summary. I don't think we're going to be able to go through all the details, but we'll just give an overview. For vulgar speech. Actually, I'm sorry, use the word navelus pet. Speaking vulgarly brings Tzoros rabbis troubles. Ugzeres kashes meschachos, and new decrees can be renewed. Uvechure soine Yisrael mesim, and youth of Israel, God forbid, could die. Yisoimim v'almonai soyakim ve'idonenim. And it comes to the point, God forbid, where you have widows and orphans crying without an answer. Shnemar al kain al bachurav lo yismach Hashem es yisoimav lo yirachim ki chuloi chanef u'meira v'chopeh doiver navala v'chazois le'shav apay v'oid yadin etuya. It says, therefore the Lord will have no joy in their young men, nor shall he have compassion on the fatherless, the widows, for everyone is ungodly and evildoer, and every mouth speaks wantonness. For all this, his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out. Today's Gemara, if we had to give a very, very, very fast recap, is further analyzing and elaborating on the words of the Teicha and describing a series of mitzvot and the blessings they bring, and a series of terrible trouble that could befall the Jewish people for failing to observe all of those mitzvot. And we went through a whole long laundry list of mitzvot and sins, Bittul Torah, hatred, fighting, Avodah Zarah, murder, false oaths, and inappropriate oaths, miscarriages, all different kinds of messing with justice, and a whole bunch of terrible, horrific, and shocking punishments, mostly arichut, elaboration on the words that are presented in the Teicha, in Vayikra, in Leviticus, in Nichukosai, and as well as in the end of Deuteronomy. So that is today's Gemara. Again, a lot of painful words. We also had the chance to explore a beautiful text that says that God forbid failing to give to the Kohen and the Levi and the charity, that could be bad. But if a person does, they'll see overwhelming blessings. Rain will fall from the heavens. Their crops will be so abundant. Their blessings will be so abundant. Ad sheyomar dai, ad bli dai, ad sheyomar dai. It'll be so much they're going to say, Hashem, wow, this is wonderful, but we don't have enough to contain all this blessing. And so for all of the traumatic and shocking words, we have some beautiful, positive, and optimistic words, in addition to the fact, of course, that much of the horror and the pain and the tragedy portrayed in the Teicha and elaborated here in our Talmud have come true. And certainly Hashem is equally capable of providing all of the comfort, blessing, and good news that is also alluded to in that very text in Parshas Bechukoisai, if be Hashem's will, that we should be zocheh to see the arrival of Mashiach. And until then, health and good circumstances and goodness for all of Klal Yisrael, and certainly everybody here on this chat. Chol asher lahem. We'll close again, mentioning that this week learning has been in honor of the Yartzah yesterday of Eliyahu Rabbi Yochanan Halevi, the month of learning Chaya Leah Bas Binyamin Allah Shalom, and in prayerful hope and wishes for good health and good circumstances for all. In a moment, first of all, in a moment, any questions or final comments are welcome. Then we'll end this chat, and then everyone's invited to rejoin right away to study today's Chumash with Rabbi Shalom Ber. Any comments or questions?
When you mentioned that Hashem could leave the land desolate, many years ago, my wife and I were in Israel for a while, and then we went to Egypt. Since I was a kid, I always wanted to see the pyramids. And you can't believe how desolate that place is. I mean, there's sand all over the place, poverty everywhere. Buildings are broken roofs and broken windows, garbage all over the place. Just horrible to watch, horrible to see. And the main street in Egypt has got 6 lanes with an avenue in between and many crossroads and no lights. So you can imagine.
Wow.
The bus took us an average of 1 kilometer, took us about 20 minutes. So when he wants something desolate, he'll keep it desolate.
Wow. Yep. Pretty crazy. So yeah. And it's a reminder that we shouldn't take for granted the blessings that we have today of Israel and its, as how it flourishes. And Hashem should continue to, the Torah says, God says, Eretz asher eni Hashem elokecha ba, mereshit hashana v'ad achrit shana. It's the land that Hashem keeps his eye on constantly from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. And certainly having close to a majority of the Jewish population should certainly attract Hashem's positive attention and blessing. And with that, let's call it a day. I hope, important announcement. Tomorrow, once again, there's going to be the Rosh Chodesh Society. And so that's a women's group. And so we're going to honor the women's participation. And tomorrow there will not be a shir. I apologize because I enjoy this shir as much as you do, but, or maybe I enjoy it more. I don't know. But, so tomorrow there will not be a shir, but Friday will continue. I'm sorry to disappoint, but again, tomorrow there will be a shir. I'm sorry, not tomorrow. Friday there will be a shir, Rosh Chodesh. And as far as tomorrow is concerned, if there's any women in your lives, please let them know they can reach out. And we'll add them to the Zoom class, which will be precisely the time that we typically have our Gemara shir. Thank you for your understanding. I'm sorry to disappoint.
You're going to send that out in the chat, right?
I will post it on the chat. I'll post in the chat that this class is off. Your wife needs to be on the women's chat, but I'll ask my wife to make sure to let her know. Anyways, thank you all. Please rejoin for Chumash with the Bear. Take care.
Thank you.